Should the world's largest climate change contributors be obligated to fund sustainable development and technologies in LEDCs? It's a big question.
So I have like a larger problem with the idea of working out who the largest contributors are to global warming, because if you're going to do it on sheer numbers, then like, I'm Pakistani but repping India. India has 1.3 billion people in it, right? So they're currently held as being one of, like the US has like announced a lot of kind of soft pushes to make them be more like, to have less carbon consumption. Comparatively, however, if you do look at the MEDCs or like the more well-developed Western world that has existed, they weren't like aware of global warming at an earlier age when they went through their industrial revolutions to start with. I think when you have to ask who's like the most, I think you have to really devise a clear metric when we talk about who these people are that are contributing to global warming and what the benefit or like the detriment is to it. Because at the end of the day, India going through its industrial revolution or having other countries go through their industrial revolutions is beneficial to their quality of life, moreover than the effects it will have on the rising sea level in certain places. And I think that need to be selfish, the ability to understand that they don't need to be selfless, like others haven't been selfless before them, is an important like proponent that needs to be taken into account in that kind of situation, and it shouldn't stifle developing countries from like moving on further in like their like population growth.
Should the world's largest climate change contributors be obliged to fund sustainable technologies and development in LEDCs? I'd say I'm 50-50, but then coming off what Ayo said, it's important that we establish who the world's largest climate change contributors are, firstly. But coming off that as well is the fact that the contributors definitely play a role in whatever countries they reside in. And when I say in whatever country they reside in, that's where they can, okay, I have a manufacturing background, and so what you find is that as much as the Western culture seeks to consumes more than the LEDCs, you find that they tend to source out because it's cheaper to go to a LEDC country to manufacture goods, even as it relates to food. And so even coming off that, even though the Western world very much contributes towards climate change, but it's also the country that they do business with and where they reside in, who also need to also take responsibility for how they do business, the policies that they do establish, and also the fact that in a lot of cases in LEDC countries there is a big gap as it relates to the rich and poor. And so because of that big gap, what you tend to find is the fact that a lot of consideration is not necessarily being made as it relates to sustainable development, and also as it relates to climate change as a whole. And so I think it's two-sided in the sense that I do think that world climate change contributors should take responsibility, but I also think that the countries that they do tend to do business with also need to take responsibility as well.
I can, just building on that, because it's a really good idea, is the idea of like, you have this like neo-colonialism that exists now, the idea that policies in developing countries is still dictated by the Western world in one way, shape or form. And like one of the most common ways of that is giving aid that has like caveats to it that need to be satisfied. I don't understand, I'm very against the idea of like these kind of interventions existing in the first place. I don't think the Western world, first of all, being able to alleviate its like carbon consumption by having carbon taxes or being able to like move their mining or their like industrial heavy operations to developing countries in the first place, and then being able to influence policy in those areas is necessarily a good thing. I think maybe it's better just to leave them to get on with their own devices and then being aware of it themselves. For example, in the projected 2100 year, I think something like 60% of Bangladesh is expected to be underwater. That's something that the Bangladeshi government is clearly aware of as a problem. It's also definitely aware of the other problems that it has, including like its lack of education and like lack of like basic like clean water. But that is a thing that it is aware of, and it is something that it will, its electorate will care about in the future, especially as that comes closer and closer. I think we need to give these people the benefit of the doubt and let them make their own decisions in those kind of situations, instead of trying to like have this kind of like upper ground in the sense that we think that we know better than them in those situations.